We have breaking news from the NFL. Former Dolphins head coach Brian Flores has filed a class action lawsuit against the NFL citing racial discrimination. The suit alleging that the league's hiring practices have left it, quote, racially segregated and managed much like a plantation, end quote. The suit was filed today in federal court in Manhattan. It names the Dolphins, Broncos, and Giants by name. Now, this is part of a Brian Flores statement. In making the decision to file the class action complaint today, I understand that I may be risking coaching the game that I love and that has done so much for my family and me. My sincere hope is that by standing up against systemic racism in the NFL, others will join me to ensure that positive change is made for generations to come. The New York Giants releasing the following statement. We are pleased and confident with the process that resulted in the hiring of Brian Daboll, their new head coach. We interviewed an impressive and diverse group of candidates. The fact of the matter is, Brian Flores was in the conversation to be our head coach until the 11th hour. Ultimately, we hired the individual we felt was most qualified to be our next head coach. All right, so a lot coming out right now, a lot to digest, and Jonathan Jones, our senior NFL insider, is here to help us out a little bit. JJ, what exactly is going on right now?
Brian Flores has filed a class action lawsuit that is alleging something that a number of black coaches have said privately, have said amongst themselves, have said to me before, and that is that he took part in a sham interview, and that sham interview was with the New York Giants before they ultimately hired Bills offensive coordinator Brian Daboll. He also alleges that he took part in another sham interview in 2019 with the Denver Broncos, a group of Broncos brass that he says were hung over at the interview, didn't take it seriously, that Vic Fangio already had the job in hand. There's a lot in this class action lawsuit, in this court filing, but that is sort of the overarching point here that he is finally putting on paper. He is putting into the court record. He is putting this lawsuit out there for anyone else who really wants to join him against not just the NFL, not just those teams that you mentioned, but all 32 NFL teams who may or may not have at some point, made shams of the Rooney Rule, have been racist in their hiring practices. And so what Brian Flores is really at the crux of this is their text messages from Bill Belichick, and allegedly Bill Belichick, where Bill Belichick, if that is him in those text messages, appears to be texting who he thinks is Brian Daboll, congratulating him on ultimately landing the Giants job. These texts, again, allegedly, blanket alleged caveat here, that Brian Daboll that Bill Belichick had already been informed that Brian Daboll had been selected as the next head coach of the Giants. This would have come just hours after Brian Flores' interview with the Giants would have been scheduled for a few days later. And so Brian Flores in this suit is saying that he went into that interview believing and knowing that it was a sham interview and that they had already picked their person. It was Brian Daboll, and that Bill Belichick had screwed up, not the language he used, but had screwed up in texting Brian Flores when he meant to text Brian Daboll congratulations. That is really the crucial piece of evidence here that's really, Chris, going to have to be hammered out, is what Bill Belichick actually knew and what he meant by that and where he had heard those things from and how definitively that was. But if you ask me the general overarching question, again, this is a class action lawsuit that is finally bringing to light what any number of black coaches have told me over my decade of covering the NFL, and certainly what has taken place far before I ever started covering the NFL.
JJ, I mean, it's a lot to digest, and we saw in that comment from Brian Flores in that statement that he acknowledges he could be risking his future as a coach in the game, and it's the only thing he's really known for a long time. What could this mean for Brian Flores' future? We still have 5 openings, and he is a candidate, we know, for at least one of those openings, if not more at this time.
I'm going to take my reporter hat off here and just, like, as a black man who has been around the league. Like, you saw what happened to Colin Kaepernick. Like, Brian Flores is probably never coaching in the NFL again. That's what his comment, that's what his statement read. That's what he understands in filing this lawsuit. That's what his entire existence as a black man in America. Like, he knows that you can't blow the whistle on something like this and ultimately be welcomed back into a group that is essentially run by folks who don't look like you. If you want to call it a blackballing or whatever, I've been texting with agents, with coaches, with executives in the past hour to a person. They're over here telling me, well, he's not coaching again. And it's not because they don't want him to coach again. It's not that they agree that that's the way that it should be. They just understand that that's probably how this is going to work out. And his acknowledgement of that in his statement sort of goes that far. So that's what he is certainly risking here. You don't sue 32 NFL teams. You don't talk about the team owner who once employed you allegedly offering to pay you $100,000 outside of your contract to lose football games so that you tank and not compromise a higher draft pick. You don't talk about a potential tampering issue on a yacht with a quarterback who is under contract, like he talks about in the winter of 2020, though it doesn't name that quarterback. You don't do all of those things and then ultimately a couple days later get trotted out as the face of another franchise. So, I think Brian Flores very clearly understands what is lying in front of him, and that is pursuing this class action lawsuit and very likely not pursuing an NFL coaching career.
All right. Hey, really, really heavy stuff, and we are just kind of diving into it right now as news breaks that Brian Flores has filed a class action lawsuit against the NFL citing racial discrimination. Jonathan Jones with us here on CBS Sports 8.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.